Behind palace walls, something deeply unsettling unfolded. The corridors of Kensington Palace, usually filled with quiet efficiency and familiar routines, fell into an uneasy silence. Staff members who had worked around royalty for decades were left shaken. Some openly emotional, others struggling to process what they had just learned. This wasn't gossip or scandal. It wasn't a leak to the press. It was personal. And it involved someone they didn't just work for, but genuinely cared about. Because when the news reached them, it became clear that life inside the palace was about to change in ways no one had prepared for. At the center of it all was Catherine, Princess of Wales, a woman many insiders quietly describe as the most human royal they've ever known. From the outside, she's polished, composed, and seemingly unshakable. But those who work closest to her know a very different version. She asks, she listens, she remembers. She knows staff members by name, remembers their children, notices when someone seems off. She doesn't command rooms, she softens them. And over the years, that warmth turned professional distance into something closer to family, which is exactly why what came next hit so hard. Royal households aren't known for emotional attachment. Staff turnover is usually high, expectations are relentless, and personal connections are often discouraged. But Catherine's household was different. People stayed, not because of prestige or ambition, but because working for her felt meaningful. She wrote handwritten notes after long tours. She checked dietary needs during late nights. She made sure credit was shared, not claimed. Slowly, without ceremony, she built loyalty that went far beyond duty. So when she suddenly disappeared from public view in early 2024, concern rippled through the palace almost immediately. In January, the palace announced that Catherine had undergone planned abdominal surgery. The statement was calm, reassuring, and deliberately brief. Officials said the condition was non-cancerous and that recovery would take time. On the surface, everything sounded controlled. But behind closed doors, staff noticed the shift. Engagements were canceled, schedules cleared, meetings postponed indefinitely. And while no one panicked publicly, there was a quiet sense that the full story hadn't been told. And then, weeks later, it became clear why. Following the surgery, further tests revealed something no one had expected. Reports later confirmed that Catherine had been diagnosed with cancer. The word alone changed everything. Titles stopped mattering. Protocol faded into the background. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales anymore. She was a mother of 3, facing something deeply frightening. Before any public announcement, Catherine made a decision that spoke volumes about who she is. She chose to tell her senior staff herself. The meeting was private. No press, no formal scripts, just honesty. Catherine explained what doctors had found, the treatment ahead, and why she would be stepping away from public duties. Those present later described the room as heavy, emotional, and painfully quiet. She was composed, but the fear was there, especially when she spoke about her children, and in a moment that broke nearly everyone in attendance. She began worrying about how they were coping, comforting them, instead of the other way around. Even in crisis, she was thinking of others. Treatment followed. Chemotherapy, exhaustion. Staff watched her endure it with quiet resolve. Some days were harder than others, but she never lost her kindness. She still asked about their families, still thanked them, still refused to be defined by illness. But as the months passed, it became clear that something inside her had shifted. Surviving something like that changes how you see time, and Catherine began asking herself questions she could no longer ignore. By late 2024, treatment was complete. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. There was relief, but also clarity. George was growing up fast. Charlotte was finding her voice. Louis was still young enough to need her constantly. These years would never come back. And so, quietly, Catherine made a decision that would ripple through the palace and beyond. She would not return to full-time royal duties. Not now. Maybe not for years. This wasn't a resignation. It wasn't rejection of duty. It was a pause, intentional and deeply personal. She chose to prioritize recovery, health, and motherhood during the years that mattered most. William supported her without hesitation. Insiders say there was never a debate. He knew the cost of losing a parent too young. He wasn't willing to gamble his children's childhoods. On tradition, Catherine then did something that devastated staff all over again. She wrote to them, personal letters, handwritten. In them, she explained her choice, thanked them for protecting her during her most vulnerable moments, and apologized for stepping back, for changing their roles, for feeling like she was letting people down. That guilt cut deeper than the news itself. Staff members cried reading her words, not because they felt abandoned, but because she believed she owed them anything at all. Their response was immediate. Messages flooded back, telling her she had nothing to apologize for, that she had already given more than enough, that choosing her children was not weakness, but courage. Many admitted her decision forced them to rethink their own priorities. Careers suddenly felt smaller, time felt more fragile, and respect for her only deepened but when the palace finally addressed the public. The announcement was careful and understated. Catherine would scale back duties to focus on recovery and family. Nothing dramatic, nothing sensational, but inside Kensington Palace, it felt like the end of a chapter. The bustling household grew quieter. Daily interactions became rare, and staff felt the absence of someone who had made them feel seen every single day. Through it all, William remained by her side, arranging his life, taking over school runs, shielding the children from fear, and thanking staff personally for their loyalty. Those close to the couple say the bond between them only strengthened. This wasn't just survival, it was alignment. As 2025 approached, hope replaced fear. Catherine wasn't retreating from life, she was reclaiming it. She made it clear this wasn't goodbye, only a pause. The causes she cares about still matter. Her role still matters, but not at the cost of moments she can never get back. The news that left palace staff in tears wasn't tragedy. It was love, a mother choosing presence over expectation, a woman redefining strength, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful decision a royal can make is choosing to be human first. And once Catherine stepped out of sight, the vacuum didn't stay empty for long. In modern royal life, silence doesn't calm people down, it invites theories. The longer she stayed off camera, the louder the guessing became, and it didn't just come from tabloids. It spread across social media at full speed, with strangers picking apart every palace sentence and every missing appearance. Acting like the lack of information was proof that something was being hidden. That wave of speculation didn't just annoy insiders, genuinely worried them, because it added a second kind of pressure on top of a medical crisis, the pressure of a global audience. Demanding answers, then came the moment that poured gasoline on the fire. On UK Mother's Day in March 2024, Kensington Palace released a family photo of Catherine with the children. It was meant to be reassuring, the kind of image that tells the public, she's here, she's okay, please breathe. But within hours, people online started pointing out odd details: Z's sleeves. Hansantil international photo agencies withdrew the image over manipulation concerns. And Catherine later apologized, saying she had experimented with editing. The Guardian +2 Vogue +2 that single incident, meant to calm things down, had the opposite effect. It didn't just raise questions outside the palace, it intensified the feeling inside the palace that their protective bubble was being invaded. And here's what most viewers don't realize. When a public figure is sick, every normal PR mistake becomes a magnifying glass. People stop reading situations with empathy and start reading them like a mystery. Staff members didn't just have to think about Catherine's health anymore. They had to think about headlines, trending conspiracies, and how all of that noise could filter back to the children. Because while adults can avoid the internet, kids can't avoid whispers. One comment at school, one classmate repeating something they overheard, and suddenly privacy doesn't exist anymore. That's why the next moment landed like a hard reset. On March 22, 2024, Catherine released a personal video message confirming she had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing a course of preventative chemotherapy. She explained that the surgery itself had been successful, but that tests after the operation found cancer had been present. ABC7 New York +1, the tone wasn't dramatic. It was controlled, careful, and deeply human-like, someone choosing honesty, because the rumors had become louder than the truth. And for staff inside the palace, this wasn't just a public update. It was relief. Because once the truth is out, people stop guessing, or at least they're supposed to. But even after the announcement, Catherine didn't suddenly return to normal. Treatment is not a quick detour. It doesn't care who you are. It changes your energy, your body, your daily rhythm. The palace could make statements, but the real work was happening in private. Recovery, family routines, protecting the kids, and managing the emotional weight that hangs over everything when your future suddenly feels uncertain. Because when a person is pushed into a fight like this, they often come out different, stronger, yes, but also clearer, less willing to perform, less willing to sacrifice the private moments that actually make a life feel like a life. And that's exactly what staff quietly began noticing. Catherine wasn't just recovering physically. She was rethinking what her role was supposed to cost her. And here's the part most people miss. That kind of shift doesn't only affect the person making it. It affects everyone around them. It affects household operations. It affects staffing. It affects planning years in advance. It affects charities, patronages, public expectations, and the invisible machine that runs behind royal life, which leads straight to the moment that made the palace feel heavy again. Because once Catherine started setting boundaries, people inside Kensington Palace realized something. The old version of business as usual might be gone. And for staff, who had spent years building a rhythm around her presence, her work, her projects, her energy, that realization didn't feel like drama. It felt like grief, not because they wanted her working, but because they wanted her safe. And as those realities sank in, one name became impossible to ignore: William. Because whatever the public saw, insiders watched him move differently during this period. Not like a royal trying to manage headlines, but like a husband and father trying to protect his home from falling apart. And what happened behind the scenes with William, according to multiple reports and royal coverage, became one of the clearest signs that this wasn't just a health chapter. It was a turning point. If you want, I can continue immediately with the next section focused on William's behind-the-scenes role. The way palace priorities shifted, and how Catherine's strategy of limited appearances reshaped everything. About how the Wales family is being presented to the world going into 2025 and beyond. William didn't step into this moment as a future king managing optics. He stepped into it as a man who had already lived every parent's worst fear. Those closest to him say the shift was immediate and unmistakable. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Engagements quietly disappeared from the calendar. Decisions that once took weeks were made in minutes, always with the same priority at the center of them: Catherine and the children. For staff who had worked under different royal households, the contrast was striking. This wasn't hesitation, it was resolve. Behind closed doors, Prince William became the primary shield. He handled difficult conversations, so Catherine didn't have to. He absorbed pressure from advisors and palace officials who were worried about optics, continuity, and long-term planning, and he made it clear politely but firmly that there would be no rushing her recovery. No symbolic returns just to calm headlines, and no expectations placed on her health for the sake of tradition. The message was simple: the family comes first, and everything else would have to adjust. Staff members noticed something else, too. William began appearing more often in ordinary moments: school drop-offs, pickup times, weekend activities, things that rarely made headlines but mattered deeply behind the scenes. He wanted consistency for the children, normality, a sense that life hadn't been completely overtaken by fear. And in doing so, he reinforced Catherine's decision without ever needing to announce it publicly. His actions said everything. This quiet realignment sent ripples through the palace. Departments began restructuring around a reduced presence. Projects Catherine once led were paused or reassigned. Long-term planning shifted from when she's back full-time to if and when she chooses. And while no one openly complained, the emotional weight of that adjustment was real. People weren't just adapting to logistical change, they were mourning a version of the future they had assumed was guaranteed. What made it harder was the contrast between public perception and private reality. Outside the palace, some voices questioned the pace of her return. Others speculated endlessly about what was really going on. But inside, there was no confusion. Staff saw the toll treatment had taken. They saw the fatigue that lingered even on good days. They saw the way Catherine carefully rationed her energy, choosing moments with her children over appearances that could wait. And that clarity made the noise from the outside feel especially cruel. Yet something unexpected began to happen as the months passed. The household didn't just slow down, it softened. There was less urgency, less obsession with perfection, Staff checked in on each other more. Priorities shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Catherine's situation had reminded everyone that no role, no matter how historic, makes someone immune to being human. And in that reminder, the palace culture changed. Catherine herself, according to those closest to her, became more selective but also more intentional. When she did engage, whether through a message, a private meeting, or a carefully chosen appearance, there was a depth to it that hadn't been there before. Less performance, more purpose; less obligation, more meaning. It wasn't that she cared less about her role. If anything, she cared more, but on her own terms now. As 2025 approached, insiders began describing the next phase not as a return, but as a redefinition. Catherine wasn't stepping away from public life forever. She was reshaping how it fit into her life. And that distinction matters, because it signals something larger than one woman's health journey. It hints at a monarchy slowly learning how to coexist with vulnerability instead of hiding it. For palace staff, the tears they shed weren't just about fear or uncertainty. They were about respect, about watching someone choose what truly mattered when everything else fell away. About realizing they had witnessed a moment that would quietly reshape royal life for years to come. And for Catherine, this chapter, painful, frightening, transformative, didn't strip her of strength, it refined it. The woman who eventually steps back into fuller public view will not be the same one who stepped away. She'll be wiser, more grounded, less willing to sacrifice the irreplaceable for the expected. Inside Kensington Palace, that truth has already settled in. The silence there now isn't empty yet, as protective. That protective silence wasn't accidental. It was built carefully, deliberately, by people who understood what was at stake. Every decision, every delay, every absence had a reason behind it, even if the public never saw it. Inside the palace, staff became quieter, not because there was less to do, but because there was more to protect. Catherine's health, her peace, her children's sense of safety, these weren't abstract ideas anymore. They were daily responsibilities. What struck many insiders most was how little Catherine complained. Even on difficult days, when energy was limited and the weight of uncertainty lingered, she didn't frame her situation as unfair. She framed it as clarifying. According to those who spoke with her privately, she often returned to the same idea, that this experience had stripped life down to its essentials. What remains when titles fade, when schedules collapse, when applause disappears? And the answer for her was always the same: family presence. And time, that clarity, reshaped how she interacted with the world. Invitations were declined without guilt. Expectations were reset without apology. And for the first time in her royal life, Catherine allowed herself to not explain every choice. That, more than anything, signaled a change, because she had spent years being the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who endured. Now, she was choosing discernment over endurance, and that choice carried weight. Staff members who had watched her grow into her role over more than a decade understood this wasn't a retreat, it was evolution. They saw it in the way she spoke about the future, not in terms of obligation, but intention. She still cared deeply about her causes, still believed in service, but now service had to coexist with sustainability. She wasn't willing to burn herself down to keep the machine running, and that perspective quietly spread. Conversations inside the palace shifted. Younger staff spoke more openly about balance. Long-serving aides admitted they had normalized exhaustion for far too long. Catherine's experience had made it impossible to pretend that relentless pressure was simply the job. It humanized the system in a way no policy ever could. And while no one framed it as reform, something fundamental was changing. The public may continue to measure Catherine's presence by appearances and headlines, but those closest to her measure it differently now. They measure it in school mornings uninterrupted, in dinners eaten together, in laughter heard behind closed doors, in strength rebuilt slowly instead of borrowed from adrenaline. There will come a time when Catherine steps forward again, more visible, more active, and when she does, it won't be because expectations demanded it. It will be because she chose it on her own terms, with her family steady beside her, and with a clarity forged in the hardest months of her life. Until then, the palace waits, not anxiously, not impatiently, but respectfully, because everyone inside those walls understands something the outside world often forgets. This wasn't the story of a princess. Stepping back, it was the story of a woman choosing to live.